This video is brought to you by Wondershare Filmora. Stick around to hear more about the company whose editing software I've personally used since the channel got started. Alright, Dragon's Dogma 2. This game has been dominating the industry news cycle, half positive, half negative lately, so after rolling the credits, doing pretty much everything you can possibly do in the game, and composing my thoughts, I'm finally ready to give my opinions. Title says it all. This is a very mixed bag, but before anyone goes thinking this will be yet another video ripping on the game for its microtransactions, which a lot of people have been doing lately, I want to make it clear that overall I enjoyed the title, and I actually do recommend that people give it a chance. With that said, yes, there are flaws. Yes, there are some ridiculously bad development and monetization decisions especially being made here. And no, it's not just a praise video, because some of those decisions make absolutely no sense. Let's start with everything you need to know before the gameplay itself, which is sadly where a large part of the criticism is initially born. Dragon's Dogma 2 has very poor levels of performance. I have a decent rig, a 2070 Super GPU, which isn't stellar by any means, especially compared to more recent hardware, but it's good. And this game has terrible performance in a lot of circumstances, and also comes equipped with not one, but two DRM programs embedded in it, which are Denuvo and Enigma. Now, oddly enough, I actually understand from a conceptual standpoint why they decided to do this. I disagree with the logic behind it a lot, but I think I understand the thought process at least. However, one of the side effects in play, particularly concerning Denuvo, is that the performance takes a massive shit periodically, and there's nothing you can really do about it. This is a well-documented phenomenon. Denuvo quite literally makes the end-user products worse in a myriad of ways, even so far in this case to a point where tampering with your save file could allegedly brick the entire game or lock you out, which is totally insane. Again, I understand why they have it in the game. I'll go over that extensively later on, because the reason I suspect they felt compelled to do so is actually quite interesting. But the fact that this game has Denuvo DRM is a very clear, unilateral negative that people should be aware of before purchasing it. Next is microtransactions. No, the video is not focusing primarily on this, but it's worth mentioning here. There are a bunch of microtransactions in the game that don't need to be there, and they're causing pretty widespread backlash as a direct result. These items are almost all accessible without paying any money. Most of them are very easy to get, by the way, and there wouldn't be any discernible difference in the overall experience were you to buy or not buy them, most likely. However, these got shoved into the game last minute. They shouldn't be a thing, and I'm not going to sit here defending that. It doesn't kill the game, and I think some of the backlash is hyperbolically misplaced right now. But this level of monetization in a $70 DRM restricted product? Yeah, it's getting roasted, and a lot of that is pretty well deserved. However, moving past all of that, which is already enough for some people to avoid the title, and I'm certainly not going to tell them that they're wrong for doing that, if you still have an interest, any at all, Dragon's Dogma 2 is a really, truly unique experience that brings a lot to the table, so let's talk about it. Alright, before diving in, this video is quite literally sponsored by the company whose editing products I've personally used since I initially created the channel. I've been sort of angling for a sponsorship from them for a long time because I've used their product for like 7 years, so I'm happy to discuss their software and tell everyone with stone cold certainty, mind you, it is good, and if you want to edit or enhance videos, you should 100% try it. Beyond the basic editing functions, the newest thing that Filmora offers is AI translation and multi-language dubbing. It's no secret I'm super against the majority of AI usage like deepfakes and social media botting, but this is an actual useful application of the technology to bring video content to a wider audience. Being able to translate existing content quickly is incredibly valuable.
Bueno, este título se ve bien. Pertenece a. Supongo que es hiperbólico, pero de hecho ni siquiera es un verdadero cebo de clic. Por Kotaku.
Also, in addition to that, they now offer AI music generation. Anyone who watches this channel knows that I don't have a clue how to use music in my content, or haven't in the past at least, so this kind of thing from a company whose products I've used for so long is a great way for me to start experimenting. Anyone out there looking for best-in-class video editing tools, including translation and now music generation, can click the link down below in the description to download Filmora for free. Again, link down below for the latest version of Wondershare Filmora, which is the software I've personally used since the channel was born, which is not a small thing to say. Big thank you to them for sponsoring the video. First thing on my end here, gameplay is key. I do care about story, and this game has a really interesting one. But the thing that matters most to me is the hands-on experience of actually controlling my character. I played the original Dragon's Dogma extensively back in the day, and I really do appreciate the lore. Again, the storytelling here is actually top-notch. It's engaging, interesting, dynamic, and keeps your attention, most importantly. But for me, it's all about exploring a world and progressing your character within that world. Dragon's Dogma 2 is an open world, narrative driven action RPG that revolves around a 4-character party system of exploration and combat. It's basically a chosen one archetype where you, the Arisen, so you're called, are selectively able to control pawns, which are basically transdimensional companions who exist primarily to serve you and others like you. Pawns are one of the coolest things about Dragon's Dogma 2 because they offer a sort of cooperative experience without ever actually meeting any other players. See, everyone creates a pawn for themselves, their main pawn, as it's called, but you can hire 2 more pawns to complete your party of 4. This means right from the start that you have a very interesting level of control over dynamic combat because you can select from multiple different classes and specializations for your entire party. On its face, that's nothing new here. Selecting party members or specializations and classes isn't something unique to this game in particular, but as you progress, you start to realize just how unique the pawn system actually is. See, your pawn is available to other players in other worlds, their own world, that is, which is cool, and you can obviously hire pawns for yourself if you want to, that were created by other players. But you can also fulfill and assign quests based on what pawn you hire or who hires your pawn. This creates a sort of pseudo-cooperative trading system where you can send your pawn out with a desired item as its quest, as well as a reward for the person who decides to give it to them. And if someone hires them and also likes what they would get in return, they can gift that item to them, thereby gifting you that item, and send them home with it while collecting whatever it is you pledged as a reward for themselves, right? Like it's a give and take type system. It's actually fantastic. See, every time you hire a pawn and bring them with you, they bring with them a certain level of knowledge that they already possess. I'm not sure if that's actual memory from their legitimate gameplay or if it's just simulated. But they can guide you to rare items or hidden loot out in the world if you tell them to, when they notify you that they are able to do that. They can even serve as quest guides in some situations. This gives them a lot of personality as well, especially when compounded by the fact that there are even ways to give them special inclinations and behaviors, if you manage to figure that out, and helps create a lot of depth in the party system that otherwise wouldn't really exist. For example, you can find a really cool, useful pawn that you want to keep around even well after they've fallen behind in their relative level, just because you like them. Like, that does happen. Now, when you do choose to get rid of them, eventually, for whatever reason, you have to give them a gift when you send them home. If they did a really good job, they had strong gear, good skills equipped, and they ended up being useful because of it, or, they did things that were pleasant for your playthrough, you can give them anything from a regular item all the way to ultra strong, super rare gear. However, if they sucked and if they consistently made your life more difficult by, let's say, collecting everything for themselves right in front of you when you found a cool chest or something like that, which then required you to go into your inventory and take the item back from them because they were trying to yoink it from you, you can give them like a piece of rotten meat or a fake item that has no actual value and send them home to their master with basically that useless thing as their reward for serving you. It's an amazing level of community interaction when you think about it, without ever actually meeting other players. And it gets even deeper the longer you play because of a sickness that they can catch called the Dragon's Plague, but I'll talk about that later on as well. The first thing I wanted to do initially here was discuss the basic party system and showcase pawns, because pawns are a really cool system. Let's recap. Open world, 4-member party exploration, where that party is composed of characters made by you and other players, opening up features like player-to-player trading, despite never actually interacting with another player in person. And those pawns can help you find things, complete quests, or build out completely different combat squads, making this one of the most interesting single-player games ever, in my opinion, because it actually manages to become something more than just a single-player experience. I can already tell this video is going to end up being super long, but it just sort of has to be. Dragon's Dogma 2 does not hold your hand. Quite the opposite, in fact, because it is entirely possible to play the whole main story and never encounter probably most of the coolest features out there. There are many specializations that you can very easily miss, entire classes with unique abilities and different playstyles that are extremely far off the beaten path, and even deeper, there are items and upgrades and things that change the entire combat loop for your whole party that are just never explained to the player in a comprehensive way. Now, for some players, that's a net negative. They dislike the fact that things don't get explained because they prefer to have a straightforward knowledge of what to do and how to do it. But for others, that level of depth is actually very appealing. Finding pretty major game-altering items, like something that can resurrect an entire town of people at the same time, or something that changes how your companions act in combat, or an entire new vocation where you can use a double-sided spear and also cast magic at the same time. Finding something like that organically on your own without being told what it is or where to look for it is one of the most satisfying experiences you can probably ever have in gaming. I don't even really want to admit publicly how long it took me to realize that the gold beetles that you find on trees permanently increase your carry capacity for your character. I had dozens of them in storage just sitting there and thought that they were some sort of crafting component because I hadn't properly read the tooltip. And that kind of thing, that sort of undiscovered thing that you didn't know, is everywhere. Discovering an entire village of elves that have really good gear at the vendors, but not speaking the language, so you have to find a way to translate it or just guess at what the options are for the vendors and muddle your way through. But then coincidentally having someone in your party the next time you go back there who happens to be able to translate for you. There's a level of dynamic gameplay that you don't often get present here. And again, without too many specific spoilers, it's an area that Dragon's Dogma 2 has executed flawlessly. Exploring the open world, especially areas that you have not seen before, feels consistently valuable, especially going off the beaten path in particular. And one thing I truly appreciate is that most of what you find in terms of items and crafting components remain useful even in the later stages of the game. You're typically not finding junk that you don't want. Everything has an actual valuable use to it. This is where the review gets a lot more complicated because I have to describe the interaction of systems now and use that as a jumping off point for some of my main criticism. The game is highly fixated on its own day-night cycle, and it's, for the most part, singularly obsessed with the idea of one save file for your character. On the one hand, that's cool, the day-night cycle at least, because it means food in your inventory, as one example, like meat or fruit, can ripen, then go bad and turn rotten, while having different crafting uses at each of those stages. That's fantastic. However, on the other hand, this level of obsession with having only one save file is what drove them to implement such ridiculously invasive anti-tamper protocols. See, I can understand why they did it. They wanted to preserve that one continuous life atmosphere where you have to live with your own decisions and consequences. The premise of the entire world, after all, is the idea of cycles. So they wanted to make it so that you play one cycle and live with your choices along the way, and then play another cycle afterward instead of save scumming all the content in one campaign. So thinking of it like that, like I said, I understand why they did it. But this is a video game, guys, with a huge open world where people want to experience everything it has to offer. They don't necessarily want to play 200 or 300 hours to do so, and they certainly don't want to be too harshly penalized for taking their time or making one or two mistakes. Dragon's Dogma 2 doesn't give a flying fuck about that. Circling back to the pawn system, there is a sickness they can catch called Dragon's Plague, I think, where if you don't spot it quick enough and kill or dismiss the infected pawn, it will literally nuke an entire town when you rest at an inn, which is the de facto save point as well, by the way, thus killing all of the NPCs in that entire area, which can completely disrupt your experience in a decidedly negative way. Again, actions, consequences, be careful, etc., etc. I get it. But that's a very deliberate creative choice here. That is not favorable to everyone, I have to say. I kind of like it, or rather, I respect it. But we have to acknowledge here that it's certainly not going to be universally appreciated. On a similar note, this enormous open world is also deceptively shallow at a certain point, because while it's certainly true that there will be moments of dynamic combat, frequently, and unexpected ambushes by certain large creatures, you will be constantly retracing your steps over and over with the same exact enemy spawns almost every single time. This is a feature left over from the original Dragon's Dogma, and for a while it didn't seem to bother me, but after dozens of hours, you realize that this is the 9th time that you ran down that exact road, the 9th time that you've been attacked by those very same harpies, and like the 7th time probably that you got annoyed over it because they weren't actually an enemy you cared about or even wanted to fight at that moment in time. That might not have been such a big issue if it weren't for the fast travel system, and this is where I have to levy some pretty harsh criticism of the title. The fast travel system is frustrating, to put it kindly. You can only use it with fairy stones, which are also a microtransaction, even though you probably won't need to buy them with real money. Do keep that in mind. Fairy stones are pretty expensive from in-game vendors in terms of gold, and there's not even that many points you can go to, at least for the early and mid-game, which exacerbates the problem of retracing your steps over and over and over again. The map itself is set up as a series of pathways. It's not a true open world per se, it's more large open tracks that loosely connect to each other, which means that when you combine this layout with a scarcity of fast travel points to jump to, and a feeling of not even wanting to waste your fast travel stones to begin with, you just amplify the retracing your steps phenomenon to the nth degree, where you always have to fight the same shitty goblins and harpies and saurians in the same spots, on the same roads, over and over. How hard would it have been, like honestly, this is a genuine question, how hard would it have been to just put some sort of threshold trigger in the main campaign story, or a level-based marker at least, that maybe turns the goblins into a different type of hobgoblin, and adds a couple chimeras and ogres to the route, maybe, at random intervals. Nothing crazy, just mix up the patterns, please. How hard would it have been to just disrupt the stagnation even slightly and make it a little bit less obnoxious to retrace your steps for the 12th or the 15th time? I have a hard time believing that they couldn't have quite easily done something like that, and a really hard time believing that the vast majority, probably almost all of the community, wouldn't have liked and appreciated that. I should make note here that as you progress the main story, you get access to a placeable teleport crystal that serves as its own fast travel point, which helps dramatically. And you can even find more of those out in the world. There's one in, never mind, I'm not going to spoil it. You can find more of them in the world, which is super exciting. So this problem mostly alleviates over time if you're frugal with spending and make sure to grab a fairy stone from every vendor who sells it when you see them. But there's a lengthy period of time where fast travel is a daunting endeavor and does not feel comfortable. Combine that with the way that they did microtransactions, and yes, I understand why a lot of people got very upset with them. Still, despite seeing the same enemies over and over, there is no shortage of dynamic moments because the combat in this game is actually fantastic. I spent the majority of my time so far on the Archer class because I found this kind of amazing combo where my Sorcerer Pawn casts a sort of light orb, and I charge it up with like 100 arrows all at once in rapid succession, and then it detonates 10, 15 times, doing multiple health bars of damage to even drakes and griffins. But the depth of combat here, generally speaking, is incredible. You can climb up on enemies, making for some really fantastic cinematic encounters. You can be riding an ox cart and just get obliterated by a griffin descending out of the sky. You can go out at night in certain areas and contend with unique bosses, and all of that using a variety of vocations that fit completely different playstyles. The ability for boss fights to stretch across the entire map, really, is actually pretty wild. These aren't arena-based encounters for the most part, which makes it so that you can have some really strange outcomes. One of your pawns, for example, can just ride an ogre off a cliff, or you can get flown up in the sky by a griffin and seemingly drop to your death, and you would have died, only for a pawn to miraculously catch you before you hit the ground or something like that. There was this one moment, actually, like breaking script for a second, where I was about to kill an ogre and one of my pawns was downed. So another one of my pawns picked it up and threw it through the other pawn at the ogre like a projectile, which killed the ogre. There's moments in this game that are really spectacular. I will say stamina was extremely hit or miss here. It's a system meant to prioritize thoughtful consideration before overexerting yourself, which I get. But if you did make a mistake and get tired in the middle of an important encounter, you might literally rage at the screen because it's so fucking slow to respond to any commands and let you actually control your character again. The pawns help, of course, if they get over to you in time. And maybe this is a skill issue or a personal problem I have, but when you get knocked down and you have to crawl around, on those rare occasions, I guess, when you run out of stamina and don't have a helping pawn near you to like give you a hand and get you back in the fight, it is horrifically sluggish to respond. And I personally don't play video games to watch my character stumble around uselessly for 10 straight seconds in the middle of what was otherwise an extremely fun encounter. Figuring out what combinations of pawns, vocations, and skills to use can lead to some pretty wild balancing situations, in a very good way, I might add. And while it's not the most polished experience I've ever seen, it's heftily enjoyable and leads to a lot of really dynamic moments where you sort of undeniably realize just how unique this game truly is. Combat can be extremely fun when you start grappling with monsters, climbing them, or perfectly timing your skills and abilities to knock them over and expose a weakness. It's got a decently high skill ceiling, I should say that, but it's absolutely cheesable if you want to go down that route. But I eventually found myself craving more large boss encounters or large enemy encounters because the smaller groups of enemies become extremely easy and very boring. I was craving more big enemies than the game actually had to offer at a certain point, which is a good problem to have. It means I generally liked playing, but it also left me wanting more and feeling slightly less fulfilled than it could have with a couple more major endgame encounters balanced around the ridiculous relative power that you have towards the end of the campaign. That is, if you explore the world fully before that point, which I pretty much did. Sticking with that topic, there are multiple endings here, which really caps off the experience of making your own way or having your own journey through the world. There's a good ending and a bad ending, sure, but there's also a third ending that literally transforms the entire world state temporarily and lets you do more main quests as well as fight new and much more rewarding enemies. This temporary world state is amazing, but you could just never discover it if you weren't being thorough or looking things up online, which again highlights how hands off this game is with its player base. For some, that's a positive. You are dropped into a world with impeccable lore and expected to find your own way in the process, but for others, it's tedious and annoying. You can stumble through a quest for a pretty long period of time before finding the solution naturally, on your own, that is, which can be frustrating at times and serve as a deterrent for players that expect a more guided experience. Likewise, repetition and inaccessibility of features, at least for early sections of the game, may push some of the community away rather quickly, but it's my job as a reviewer to be as thorough as I possibly can, which requires me to say that persistence is very heftily rewarded here, and thorough exploration is extremely satisfying. If I were forced to give it a rating out of 10, I'd give it a 7. That's not because the game is a 7, it's because the surrounding choices that they decided to make lower it to a 7. De Nouveau sucks, demonstrably affecting frame rate in a negative way. Microtransactions like the ones here are a very shitty thing to do, a fact that should never be ignored, and the performance is bad. However, if you can get past those things, the story is great, the lore as well as the world building especially are amazing, the combat has incredibly dynamic moments to it, content scope is huge, and there is a complex world to be explored that is extremely satisfying to discover. Those factors would have been a 9 out of 10, but there are some potential downsides, those being lack of explanation, general repetition, and mid-game fast travel. All in all, I'm very happy with the game. I don't think it needed to be $70, $60 would have been perfectly appropriate here, but it's fun and I'm not disappointed in my purchase, I will say that. Still more to do, but I'll probably slow down for a second playthrough sometime in the future after finishing the temporary world state. That's it. If you want to support the channel, check out the links down below. Special merchandise line, the spring collection that's closing soon, so order that if you have any interest while you can. Also Patreon, Locals, the video sponsor, Filmora, of course, and more, but I'll cut it there and stop rambling. As always, thank you all for watching, question everything, and have a nice night.